Hi everyone, how's it going? Last video was a review of the Arma 7-second Ki-84 Hayate. Today I'm going to show you how all the parts came together and the scratch build that I also added to it. So without further ado, let's begin. Starting from the cockpit, there are a good amount of parts and details for this scale, which is good but also concerning as I'm going to use the brassing seat. As you can see, comparing the plastic and the 3D seat is really weird because they seem from different scales, and fitting the 3D printed seat was not a quite simple task. The structure behind the seat must be bent before adding according to the instructions. At first no problem, but after adding the control stick the problems started. The seat got too squeezed, so I had to cut some plastic and reduce the angle of the structure to get it in place. When the seat sits in place, I proceeded to add the remaining plastic parts and some LED wires, always using pictures of the real cockpit as reference. Even though there are many of the controls and levers made from plastic, a few things are still missing, so I added some levers made of copper wire. Looking at the reference pictures, you can see a good amount of wires running through the cockpit floor and sidewalls. I tried to make the most prominent of them, because there is a lot, really. However, putting all of them might just be a waste of time because they will be hidden after all. Anyway, all the wiring were fixed using black superglue, and after they were bent in shape, I cleaned the excess superglue with the bonder. Now a fun fact, if you have already built one of this kit, you will probably find weird that I'm replacing the PE part from scratch one on the left sidewall. Well, I simply didn't find the PE part. I thought it was an error of the instructions, but in the end the part was right there. And I didn't have enough capacity to find it when I needed. Well, just a heads up that this part is well camouflaged in the PE sheet. Anyway, the outcome of this Mr. Magoo fit was quite good, so I wasn't really upset with it. The rudder cables were made of 0.1mm copper wire. They are quite fine, but also very visible even after closing the fuselage. Another feature that was presented in the left sidewall as pre-molded plastic was the trim control wheel and the chain protection. I drilled some holes on a copper sheet, cut the rectangle and bent the sides, just like a PE part. The trim wheel is a leftover from another kit. The Canopy crank handle was also scratch built. The cockpit base color was the Tamiya dark green, with highlights of Mr. Hobby dark green and mixed with white. This color choice is probably not the right one. I read many references, forum discussions over Japanese interior color, and my conclusion is that no matter the color used, someone always will say it's wrong. So this is my interpretation and understanding at the moment. A shade of green. Maybe it got a little too dark or too green, but that's it. As I was in the brink of losing my sanity, I decided to accept the base color and moved to the acrylics, painting the details around the cockpit. I used aluminum, earth tones, dark grays, blue, and so on. First I was planning to use chipping effects. That is why you can see an aluminum coat under the green. However, the contrast was too intense and I decided to paint the chipping with light greens. It is much more time consuming, but the final effect pleases me better. The control panel was painted with dark rubber color, followed by a medium gray dry brush over the gauges to highlight the contours and black inside. Then a coat of clear varnish and it was ready for the gauge decal. I also used decal softener for better confirmation. The final touch was adding a small drop of UV resin on each gauge. A pin wash of dark green was applied to enhance the shadow effect. I used the pre-painted seat belts that came with the 3D seat. The color contrast was too strong, so I bring it down by applying a buff filter. And after that, the cockpit is pretty much done. Disregarding the green color and all the discussions around it, I really like the result, especially the control panel that easily beats many pre-painted photo-etched ones out there. The last part before closing the fuselage halves and hiding most of the effort so far is the radial Homari engine. I painted a first coat of alclad aluminum over glossy black and then applied a black and sepia wash. The provided photo etch fluid lines is a nice touch to the realism. It's just a matter of patience to fix it in place and bend all the lines. The crankcase was the last part to be added, and some wash and oil effects were applied. With these interior parts ready, it's time to join the fuselage halves. The fitting is quite good, especially when you place the fuselage part over the cockpit. Then I clean the oversprayed area with isopropyl alcohol to reduce the messy appearance. However, on the underside there was a small gap on the joint that I closed with a piece of stretched sprue soaked with cement. After a while the sprue got a bit melted and I pressed it to ensure it fills all the gaps. When cured, it is easily sanded. The upper part of the engine cowl has the carburetor intake and the AJ103s. I painted the intake interior with aluminum and used black oil to give the impression of continuity inside the engine compartment. The images was also drilled as the kit part is just closed. The cowling front part has a carburetor intake but lacks the divider, so I cut a piece of 0.1mm copper sheet to fit inside the intake. Putting the remaining cowling parts together was the most problematic moment of this build. I ended up with some gaps and misalignments between the parts. It was a pity because there are many rivets and fasteners around this area, and most of them will be lost during the adjustments. Maybe these problems were caused by the lack of skills of the person sitting behind the camera, huh? Well, I might find it out when I chat with another modeler who also has built one of these kits. Anyway, I used some plastic sheet to fill the gaps and get a smooth transition between the misalignments on the upper cowl. I also scraped and sanded the engine firewall side joint to give the impression of a gap under the engine cowl. The control surfaces were cut with a razor saw. The ailerons were cut only on the sides, which gives, in my humble opinion, a nice touch to the model, even being a subtle modification. Cutting with the razor saw leaves sharpened edges, however it can be easily fixed applying some extra thin cement to soften the plastic and clean some plastic dust. On the elevators I wanted to change its position, so I completely separate them from the horizontal stabilizers. With a rotary tool I made a groove on the horizontal stabilizers to better fit the elevators in an angled position. On the elevators I glued a stripe of plastic card that I later sanded to a round profile, which nicely fits into those grooves. Then it was just a matter of fixing them on the angle I wanted. Back to the cowling area, I finally gathered some motivation and sanded the misaligned joints. The result was pretty smooth, but I lost almost all fasteners around the front section. At least some remains of them served me as a guide to remake using a .25mm hand drill. Just a superficial hole was enough. The Aero Detail books has great blueprints of this aircraft. Furthermore, I am a bit crazy about riveting. So I riveted the whole kit, first drawing the lines with graphite and then using the riveter tool. The landing light of the kit is just a clear part, quite simplified for a big feature on the leading edge of the left wing. So I decided to improve it by cutting a small circle of copper sheet, pressing it on the middle over the cutting mat to give it a conical shape. Then I checked if the size was okay and painted it with liquid chrome from Molotov. The light bulb was made with thin solder wire. A quick touch on the solder tool is enough to give the spherical shape. Then I cut it and placed it in the center of the conical piece. To fix the light on the leading edge, I used UV resin. First layer was only for fixation, then I started adding small drops of resin to fill the landing light gap. After some tests, I realized that the UV resin gets a better shape of the leading edge when I cure it with the leading edge facing downwards. This makes the resin to concentrate on the middle instead of the corners, which happens when facing it upwards. The result is almost perfect leading edge shape. I applied UV light for about 15 minutes and then left it to cure for 24 hours to ensure it's completely cured. Then I sanded it flush to the leading edge. To polish it, I took a piece of cotton and wrapped it around the rotary tool. This is a good way to polish small sections. Just be careful not to put too much pressure and jeopardize all your work. And the result was an extra clear landing light. much better than the clear part that came with the kit. Well, talking about clear parts, it is masking time, yay! But no, the process just wasn't that much pain because there is a provided kabuki mask, but only for the outside canopy frame. As I'm going to make it open, I have to mask the inside too, so I use the leftover kabuki frame as a jig and cut new ones, of course making some adjustments. This is a lot of work, but in the end it is worth it. Putting the wings and fuselage together is quite easy and the fitting is almost perfect. The only gaps left behind are the ones on the lower back and the small ones on the wing roots close to the cowling. I just filled them with stretched sprue and some sanding. Of course I had to rescribe the lower panel line later, but during this process I realized that there are two more things to adjust. First one is that the flaps are flush with the fuselage on the kit, which is a bit different from the reality, as there is an overlap of the flaps on the fuselage, so I scraped some plastic along the panel lines to make this effect. The second one is that there is a joint line between wings and fuselage on the kit, making it look thicker than the real one, so a bit more filling and sanding there too. I think the result got pretty convincing. The wheel wells and landing gear legs have some struts and minor details, but lack hydraulics and other components, so I increased it a little bit by adding some lead and copper wires. The shock absorbers were painted with Molotov liquid chrome. On the tail wheel I scraped and sculpted a little bit the plastic canvas, making some fold effects. On the spinner I drilled and carved the spinner dog. Then I added the brass pitot tube on the left wing, fixed the 3D exhaust on the upper right side by joining the two pipes together, cut the muzzle brakes from the brass 805 cannons and drilled new holes on its end. The last thing was to glue the aft canopy part. That demanded some extra work because it didn't fit quite well on the fuselage, so again some filling and sanding were required. And that completes the assembling process. As you can see, I didn't fix everything yet, for obvious reasons, like the landing gear fairing. Some other parts like the windshield, exhaust, landing gears and propeller are temporarily fixed. I was quite pleased with the overall assembling. My remarks on this kit are that it's a quite good kit, despite some fitting problems and lack of details on others, which is expected for this scale. The plastic is a bit too soft for my personal taste, so be careful with fresh blades and sanding. As the majority of kits out there, there are many aftermarket products available to increase the level of details and so on. I used some of them, but the kit's parts are already good enough. Of course, the pitot tube and cannons are really game changers, and are much better than the plastic ones. Just keep in mind that usually aftermarket products demand some adjustments and modifications, like the 3D printed seats. That gave me enough headache right at the beginning. I added some scratch material on the interior and wheel wells, but they will be mostly hidden in the end, so probably not mandatory elements. Here's the assembling score. Feel free to stop the video and check all the subcategories. The assembling score is 4.6 out of 5, which is really good. With the inbox score of 4.3 shown in the previous video, the final score for this Arma Ki-84 in 7-second scale is 4.4. And this concludes this assembly. Next video will be the painting job. It might take a little while, but I'll try my best to don't let you waiting forever. So thanks for watching and your support, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done yet. Cheers!